Building a spacecraft is no mean feat. It involves lots of testing before it can launch. While the Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) won't allow SpaceX to test the Starship with a launch, has the company stopped working on its Booster 4 prototype? Of course not. In fact, there is an exciting update on the Super Heavy booster that we will bring you. Stay with us as we bring you all the latest info on the Super Heavy finally testing in January. When you need the might of the most powerful rocket in operation, SpaceX is who you approach. It has the Vulcan Heavy, which beats all other rockets in the market. However, SpaceX is set to maintain its lead position with the new rocket it is building, the Starship. People in the business of sending payloads to orbit will love the liftoff capacity of the Starship, in excess of 100 tons. Thanks to the spacious volume, the rocket can also take any shape of cargo. The Starship is a two-stage rocket, and the lowest stage is the Super Heavy. In the current Booster 4 prototype, 29 Raptor engines will provide the thrust it needs to send the ship or upper stage to orbit. Elon Musk, the CEO, has mentioned that the number of rocket engines will eventually be increased, but the Booster 4 is currently equipped with 29. Since the Super Heavy is reusable, it will return to land just like the upper stage after each launch. Musk expects a turnaround time of less than an hour before the next launch. The reusability will bring down launch costs by several orders of magnitude. We have brought you updates on SpaceX's progress at its Starbase facility in Boca Chica. However, with the speed at which SpaceX is proceeding, there have been massive changes on the Super Heavy, and many of them are visible to the outside observer. This is despite the Federal Aviation Administration dragging its feet on approving the Starship's first orbital flight. First, SpaceX is making changes to the Super Heavy going forward. One update actually is a result of a design change to the ship. What is SpaceX doing to the ship? According to Musk, starting with Ship 24, which is likely the next ship SpaceX will complete, the methane header tank will be moved from the ship's common dome to its nose cone. From the start, the oxygen header tank has been located at the very tip of the nose. The placement was inconvenient, but its purpose was to shift the ship's center of gravity forward. However, the methane header tank will now join it in the nose, with the apparent explanation being a need to shift the center of gravity even further forward. Perhaps this change was planned before SpaceX realized the performance benefits of a stretched 9-engine Starship. Still, it could also be a preemptive modification meant to counteract the added weight of 3 more Raptor engines and more extended tanks. Counting from the nose, it takes about 7 stack operations to assemble the basic structure of the ship fully. However, with the design changes coming from the S-24 ring and an upgraded nose cone that will debut on the same ship, fully assembling a nose cone will now take 2 or 3 stacks down from 5, and fully assembling a ship will take 6 stacks down from 7. This is not a major redesign, but these changes will significantly simplify and potentially speed up the ship assembly, meaning other actions like installing the plumbing, wiring, and heat shield installation will become easier and faster. SpaceX is expanding Starship's nose barrel from 4 to 5 rings tall. This will end up affecting the Super Heavy because it means potentially reducing the number of booster sections needed on the Super Heavy from 9 to 7 or 8. This will be a remarkable change because it is going to affect the booster's height. However, with the plan to increase the number of rocket engines on the booster, more fuel will be needed, and perhaps SpaceX will retain the current height or even add to it to contain the extra propellant needed. However, the Super Heavy is getting ready for changes of its own. Last month, SpaceX sleeved the Super Heavy thrust dome with several steel rings, partially completing the first 33-engine thrust section. However, instead of the usual aft barrel section comprised of 3 6-foot-tall or 1.82 meters steel rings, this particular sleeve was made up of 4 rings about 1.4 meters tall each, the first time in Starbase history that shorter rings have appeared on any hardware. Exactly why SpaceX is changing or what benefit SpaceX is getting from keeping a given ship or booster section the same height while adding more smaller rings to it is not known. However, it's a process that will inherently increase the complexity and amount of work required to complete that section. The next set of changes are exciting because they're a pointer to something, which we will tell you about later on. For the first time, SpaceX has installed a complete set of aero covers on a Super Heavy booster prototype. These aero covers' job is to protect the booster from both itself and Earth's atmosphere during ground testing, liftoff, ascent, and re-entry. They're basically thin steel shells mounted on metal box frames. The most obvious aero covers slot over the top of 6 racks of equipment installed on the outside of Super Heavy's aft end, giving the booster protection for its hydraulic systems, pressure vessels, avionics, and heat exchangers. These components contain electronics, composites, and thousands of feet of wiring and thin plumbing, which are quite vulnerable, situated a few dozen feet from the full force of about 33 Raptor engines or near the leading edge of a hypersonic re-entry vehicle. The protection of the aero covers is crucial during re-entry because most of the systems located on Super Heavy's utility built would begin malfunctioning or be destroyed outright if directly exposed to just a few seconds of the hypersonic buffeting and heating Starship boosters will experience during re-entry. If you have noticed, the Falcon boosters almost always use re-entry burns to slow down and create a sort of heat shield with their own exhaust. However, SpaceX is designing Super Heavy to survive the full force of re-entry without an extra burn to cushion the blow. So for the Super Heavy to survive re-entry and still land in good enough condition to enable anything close to same-day reusability, SpaceX has to shield every equipment at risk on Super Heavy's exterior carefully. This is the purpose of the aero covers that SpaceX is now installing on Super Heavy B4. Mind you, SpaceX did install some aero covers on Booster 4 the last time it was installed on the orbital launch mount. They covered a pair of hydraulic and heat exchanger racks, but left all 4 composite, overwrapped pressure vessel racks and an umbilical port uncovered. After removing the B4 from the launch mount for the 3rd time late in December, SpaceX removed both covers. This January, SpaceX quickly installed all 6 covers for the first time and began sealing each cover's exposed corners. SpaceX also installed aerodynamic surfaces around Booster 4's protruding umbilical port, smoothing out any hypothetical airflow around the device. Before SpaceX installed the main aero covers, SpaceX had added about half a dozen small boxes, seemingly designed to protect a number of thin metal probes that pierce through Super Heavy's tanks and skin and are connected to avionics boxes. Also, although it was less visible, SpaceX's teams worked on finishing Super Heavy B4's Raptor heat shielding with many similar sheet steel covers and panels. So why are these aero covers significant? This is because they're usually the last components to be installed because, logically, you can't cover up the elements you want to protect without finishing them. What this means is that SpaceX is finishing up the Starship. So Super Heavy B4 is likely just a few parts shy of actual completion and is about as ready as it'll ever be for static fire testing. As far as we can tell, those aero covers and Raptor heat shields are essential for Super Heavy B4 to be able to perform more than one test at a time without immediately requiring significant repairs. Unlike the ship, which has been chiefly tested with 3 engines at once and will perform static fire tests on a maximum of 6 Raptor engines, Super Heavy B4 will eventually try all 29 Raptor engines simultaneously, putting more pressure on the components on the booster. You know, when almost 30 engines are about to be tested, even nominal pre-burner testing will likely produce a massive fireball that could engulf Super Heavy's aft, if not the entire booster, with flames. For static fire testing, Raptors typically make a smaller and briefer but still substantial fireball during the shutdown, creating another potential source of damage to any sensitive hardware located anywhere on or in Booster 4's thrust section. So the Super Heavy aero covers will be necessary for surviving static fires just as they're needed for surviving launches and landings. Of course, SpaceX will not start its static fire test with all the 29 engines. It will likely begin with the inner ring rocket engines, note how the boosters behave, then test those on the outer ring and take more notes before firing up all the engines simultaneously. The next date the FAA has fixed for making a decision of SpaceX's application for permission to fly the Starship to orbit is later in February. This will give the company more time to complete its work on the Starship. Let's hear what you think of the Starship's new features in the comments section below.